right.
So this is a real informal group, obviously, and I never knew what a pop-up talk was, but now I think I do. I pop up, I talk, and I sit down. And you're asking me to do something in 20 minutes, you might as well ask me to do it in 1 minute, because I've given 6-hour workshops on this, and 50 minutes in Lori's class, and 3 hours generally, and I still enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to this. I only have 3 slides. That's about all you can do in 20 minutes. And I just want to make, what I decided to do is, instead of trying to give you an overview of what's in the book, is to just hit on a key point that I hope that we can discuss after we finish, and then a few topics related to it to help clarify that key point, that some of which you may be surprised at, because a lot of people don't understand the subtle differences between the different types of drug abuse. So the key point then is addiction, properly diagnosed, is a chronic medical disease involving a pathological change in the brain caused by exposure to many psychoactive drugs that have the ability to produce drug addiction. All substance use disorders, including drug addiction, can be successfully treated. Such knowledge, along with education of health professionals and the general public, will eventually reduce stigma against the disease. Now that paragraph will create a lot of questions in some of your minds, because, well, how do we know this? And what do you mean by properly diagnosed? And what do you mean this is chronic? You know, all drug overuse is not chronic. Sometimes people do it for a while and then they let it go. So what I found, and something that really disturbs me, is that the media and people in general tend to use the word addiction way too sloppily. You say, I'm addicted to that little vase of flowers over there. I'm addicted to the Serenity Prayer. You know, people have just used that term for anything. And when in my view, that belittles the severity of the drug addictions, for which there's 25 years of genetic and neurobiological research showing that those are truly compulsive disorders where people can't stop using drugs. And the problem is that in treatment, we tend to treat everybody who's overusing the drugs because everybody has problems. But the medical disease that I want to focus on today is diagnosable, it is treatable, it has a pathology in the brain, insurance will cover its treatment, just like cancer, just like diabetes, just like myasthenia gravis, just like chronic leukemia. And people tend to forget that, and so they argue about, well, this is not a disease. Well, what they're seeing is those people who are overusing drugs who can stop anytime they want. They just need a little different type of handling or treatment. So I think that tells us that we need to learn a little bit more about it. And so here's my last slide. This one, I'm only 5 minutes into it. What I've done, and this is based upon some colleagues' comments to me and what we might do to get out of this predicament, is to, we'll never get rid of the use of the word addiction in common language. And so we got to do something to be able to kick up and identify the medical part, the medical disease part of this drug overusage. So I decided to call that big A addiction, which is addiction to drugs, and then little a addiction, which is all the other ones, compulsive behaviors and activities. I'm addicted to Oreo cookies, I'm addicted to shopping. And it even goes so far as some of the common addictions that everybody talk about: sex, exercise, internet, pornography. And everybody says, those are serious. Yeah, they are. They're not triggered by an agent, like a drug is, like a drug addiction is, but guess what? We don't know where those compulsive behaviors occur in the brain. And in that way, they are differentiated from the drugs which produce addiction, where we do know where they occur. And so I always ask the students to do something goofy, and you can do this with me if you don't mind. Take 2 fingers and go like this, and put another one above your right or left ear, and imagine where those lines cross in the middle of your brain. Now, don't take your fingers down. bend your fingers, and what it says is something goes wrong in that part of the brain. Now straighten your fingers, which suggests we can fix it. And what you're pointing at is where addicting drugs produce their problem. So we call that the mesolimbic dopamine system. Scientifically, it's also known as the brain's reward pathway. And you've heard it called other things like the pleasure pathway, things like that. So, we know where it occurs. When cancers happen, we know where they occur. We can see them. Okay? So, you can compare and contrast the well-accepted medical diseases with big A addiction in many, many ways, and it stacks up the same almost every way. I've heard people say, well, you know, this is not really addiction because the families are so much a part of it. Tell me if you're a cancer patient whether the family's not involved. It's the same thing. So we have to keep in mind that anybody who wants to attack this issue and say addiction is not a disease, you just have to say, oh, yes, it is. It has the same characteristics as what I used to call the good diseases that only the good people get, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and things like this. Here, this still has the stigma of being a bad disease, just like mental illnesses. Those people they did it to themselves and they're bad. And you guys all are aware of that stigma. Some people have what it takes to develop addiction. That's surprising. Some people say, no, if you just use heroin long enough, you'll eventually get addicted. Not true. It's just not true. The sloppy epidemiology statistics from the 1990s indicate that about 1/4 of the people who use heroin go on to develop heroin addiction. The rest of them fall away, or they continue to use. You can call them bad people, misusers, overusers, criminals, whatever you want to call them, but they're not addicted, and they never will be. So that's a surprising statistic to a lot of people, and that shows you why you just can't call everybody an addict just because they're using an illegal drug or using it too much too often. And it all spins out of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And I tend to use that a lot because that's a very highly respected set of diagnostic characteristics that psychiatrists have set up based upon committees discussing those characteristics. And you have to satisfy a certain number of those diagnostic criteria to be diagnosed clinically, medically, as someone who has what we now call severe substance use disorder. And if it's to heroin, you call it severe heroin use disorder, or OUD, opioid use disorder. We used to call it, based upon the previous edition of the DSM, chemical dependency, opioid dependence. And people don't like that because it gets mixed up with the physical dependence that is so characteristic of withdrawal from certain drugs. So now we're in the new age of the new terminology, and that kind of complicates things. We can discuss that in a little while if necessary. So, but some people just don't have what it takes. They look like they're trying to get addicted. They use drugs like crazy and everything. God, they really look like they're trying to get addicted. You just can't. After a while, they just give up. My friend John, the recovering alcoholic, he said he's seen a lot of people who tried to become an alcoholic and they just couldn't do it. Yeah, so it's a severe end of substance use disorder that we're really talking about. 6 or more out of the 11 criteria. Okay, for those of you who know the criteria. Okay, most drug users do not develop addiction. Same way with cocaine. About 17 to 20% of the cocaine users will go on at some time in their lives to develop the disease of addiction. The other ones just kind of give it up, or they go merrily on their way, but they can really stop anytime they're pressed to stop. Most drug overusers are simply choosing to use drugs. Most drug overusers. So those are all the people who overuse drugs, and they're choosing to do it. Some of them lose control over their use of the drug, and they become addicted. And again, the numbers are really sloppy, but across the board, it's around 15 to 20% of people who use drugs. Some are very low, like marijuana, estimated number is 9%. The highest one is nicotine at 32%. And I wish they'd replicate those studies from the 1990s. There was a big study, and it's never been replicated, but it's the only clue that we have it indicates that most people don't have what it takes to become addicted. And you know, this is really important because those of you who are practicing in this area, you're helpers. You want to help everybody who has a drug problem. And that's generally what we do at CSR, from what I understand. People come in and you want to help them. You don't do diagnosis. You're not a medical hospital, right? But wouldn't it be nice if you had an easy way of diagnosis, or you did use diagnostic criteria, more than just the audit or something like that, so that you could target the treatments better? That would be much more helpful theoretically. Now, that assumes we have the treatments. We don't have the treatments that target drug overusers versus drug addicts. Tends to be that some of the treatments work for both, but we don't know for sure. Okay, not all drugs that affect the brain can produce addiction. Some people say, well, if it affects your mood, it can be addicting. Anti-schizophrenic drugs don't have the qualities to produce addiction. Why? They don't work up here. They don't have the ability to work on the mesolimbic dopamine system. They work elsewhere in the brain. Another one would be lithium, used to treat bipolar disorder. It doesn't have the ability to target this part of the brain. So lithium is non-addicting. And a big controversy. The controversy is mainly driven by one laboratory out of Johns Hopkins who insists that caffeine is addicting, and that caffeine can satisfy enough criteria in the DSM to be addicting, and that's not agreed to by most scientists. So I like to go around saying, if you think you're a caffeine addict, you're simply wrong. A lot of people like to boast about it. Yeah, I'm addicted to caffeine. Oh, I have to have my 20 cups of coffee a day. And it's almost like they get a smile on their face when they talk about that, but cocaine addicts don't smile that much because of that. Physicians, nurses, pharmacists, really in the real world should be the ones to diagnose and treat addiction. Psychologists and social workers, you got a bigger role. You have a support role to the physicians, nurses, and pharmacists. Plus, you know how to treat other SUDs better than the people who are treating the medical portion of this. And the management of addiction should include medications, very clearly. Medications have always, according to AA philosophy, been banned from being used for alcoholics because nobody wants to take a mood-altering drug. But now the big wave is to use medications that appear to be much more effective and much more available for the treatment of opioid problems. So medications really are very helpful there. For alcohol, we have two medications that tend to reduce craving, but physicians don't know how to use them, so they're rarely prescribed. Acamprosate and naltrexone. And then for smoking cessation, we have two, varenicline and the other one, just blacking on the name right now. But at any rate, there are two smoking cessation aids that are medications that tend to reduce cravings for nicotine. Plus you have the nicotine replacement patches and things like that. So there are only 6 that we really have to worry about, but they are way underused. And you might expect me to say that as a pharmacologist, but I'm not a big drug pusher. I really don't think that you should be using drugs, especially because the side effects often are too great compared to the efficaciousness of these. And even naltrexone and acamprosate have been shown to be effective in only about 50% of people who use it. So you could say, is there a benefit to risk ratio there? Yes, there is, and that has to be discussed, because that's what medicine operates on, is that the medication is more beneficial than risky. And we do that with cancer patients too. In the case of a fast-growing tumor, it's much better to give a chemical that's probably going to nail the rest of your organ systems while getting rid of that tumor rather than letting people die. The risk is very high, benefits very high. Cancer drug, anti-cancer drugs. So that's it. I hope that that has given us a grounding for a discussion that we can determine whether any of this might be useful in a public institute in the future.